This was a wedding that would redefine the British monarchy. It was an event watched by the world, celebrated by millions, and it marked the beginning of a partnership that would steer a nation through its darkest hour. But the story of this momentous day doesn't start with a fairy tale romance. It starts with a refusal, not once, but twice. The woman who would become a beloved queen turned down the future king of England. This is the true story of their roller coaster courtship, the shy, stammering prince who wouldn't give up, and the groundbreaking 1923 wedding that changed the monarchy forever. In the early 1920s, the line of succession to the British throne seemed pretty straightforward. The heir was the charismatic Prince of Wales, known to his family as David, a man who captivated the public and embodied the glamour of the Jazz Age. And then there was his younger brother. Prince Albert, the Duke of York, or Bertie to his family, was his brother's opposite in almost every way. He was a man who lived his life in the shadows, not by choice, but by nature. Shy, sensitive, and struggling with a debilitating stammer that made public life an agony, Bertie was never meant to be king. He was the second son, the spare, a quiet figure dutifully carrying out his obligations, happy to let his dazzling older brother have the spotlight. His childhood had been tough, marked by ill health and a rigid royal upbringing that didn't do much for his gentle spirit. He was a man of quiet integrity and deep feeling, but these qualities were often hidden behind a wall of insecurity. Meanwhile, far from the stuffy confines of the royal court, Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon was becoming one of the most vibrant figures on the London social scene. As the youngest daughter of a Scottish earl, she had an aristocratic pedigree but not a single drop of royal blood. Her childhood at Glamis Castle in Scotland was, unlike Bertie's, filled with warmth, freedom, and affection. She was spirited, charming, and had a mischievous sense of humor and a laugh you couldn't help but join in on. But her sunny personality hid a core of incredible strength, forged during the First World War. The war had turned her family home, Glamis, into a hospital for wounded soldiers, and Elizabeth, just a teenager, threw herself into caring for them. She wrote letters for them, ran errands, and simply sat and talked with men broken by the horrors of the front lines. The war also brought devastating personal tragedy. Her beloved older brother Fergus was killed at the Battle of Lewes in 1915, a loss that marked her forever. This experience gave her a maturity and empathy that were well beyond her years. She understood duty and sacrifice not as lofty ideas, but as lived realities. She was a woman who knew her own mind and valued her freedom more than anything. When Prince Albert and Lady Elizabeth met at a dance in 1920, the shy prince was instantly captivated. He had found the one person who made him feel at ease, whose energy cut through his own shyness. He was completely smitten. For Bertie, it was love at first sight. But for Elizabeth, the path forward wasn't nearly so clear. In 1921, after a year of quiet courtship, Prince Albert worked up the courage and proposed. He offered Elizabeth a spot right at the heart of the royal family. To his utter shock, she turned him down. Her refusal wasn't a rejection of the man, but of the life he represented. Elizabeth had seen the gilded cage of royalty up close, and she was terrified of it. In her own words, she was afraid never, never again to be free to think, speak, and act as I feel I really ought to. The rigid rules, the constant public eye, the total loss of a private life, it was a price she wasn't willing to pay. She'd seen how the institution could smooth away a person's individuality, and she valued her independence too much to risk it. Adding another wrinkle to the situation was the interest of another man, James Stuart, Albert's own aide, who was also close to Elizabeth. While historical sources note his presence, the extent of their romance remains a subject of speculation. For a while, it seemed like the prince's quiet pursuit was doomed. Heartbroken but determined, Bertie made a promise to his mother he would marry no one else. A year went by. In February 1922, Elizabeth served as a bridesmaid at the wedding of Bertie's sister, Princess Mary, which brought her back into the royal circle. The next month, Bertie proposed for a second time, and for a second time, she gently but firmly said no. His persistence still hadn't overcome her deep worries about royal life. Bertie was crushed. He wasn't a man who showed his emotions easily, but his despair was obvious to everyone around him. He retreated even further into himself, convinced he'd lost his only shot at happiness. The future of the shy Duke of York, and in ways no one could yet imagine, the future of the monarchy itself, was hanging in the balance. Watching her son's heartbreak was his mother, the formidable Queen Mary. Mary of Teck was the very picture of royal duty and tradition. But she was also a mother who saw her sensitive son in real pain. She had met Lady Elizabeth and saw in her the exact qualities Bertie needed in a partner: warmth, strength, and a calming confidence. Queen Mary became convinced that Elizabeth was the one girl who could make Bertie happy. In a quiet but deeply meaningful move, Queen Mary herself traveled to Elizabeth's family home, Glamis Castle. This wasn't a formal royal inspection, but a personal visit. She refused to interfere directly in her son's love life, but her presence at Glamis was a powerful and clear signal. It was the ultimate seal of royal approval, assuring Elizabeth's family, and maybe Elizabeth herself, that she wasn't just acceptable, but truly wanted. The Queen saw that Elizabeth's vibrant spirit wasn't a problem to be contained, but an asset to be embraced. Around the same time, some reports suggest that Bertie's rival, James Stewart, conveniently took a better-paying job in the American oil business and left the scene, a move some historians think might have been quietly encouraged by the royal court to clear the way for the prince. For nearly 2 years, Bertie had waited. His quiet devotion never faltered. Elizabeth, in turn, couldn't ignore the depth of the prince's feelings or the quiet strength of his character. She began to see that his love wasn't a passing crush, but a deep and lasting commitment. She started to wonder if a life with him wouldn't be the end of her freedom, but the start of a new kind of purpose. Could she serve the nation alongside this good and decent man, using her own strengths to support him? In January 1923, at her family's country home, Bertie asked for her hand a third time. This time, after all the doubt, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon finally said yes. She had made peace with the public duties that lay ahead, deciding that her love for the man was greater than her fears of the institution. The engagement was announced on January 15, 1923, and the public was thrilled. In an era when royal marriages were often strategic, this was a real love match. Bertie's choice to marry a British aristocrat instead of a foreign princess was seen as a modern and welcome change. The shy prince was finally stepping into the light with a remarkable woman by his side. The wedding was set for April 26, 1923, at Westminster Abbey. This was going to be more than just a royal wedding. It was a statement. In the aftermath of the Great War, which had shattered empires, this union felt fresh and modern. The newly formed BBC asked to broadcast the ceremony on the radio, a revolutionary idea at the time. However, the Archbishop of Canterbury reportedly vetoed it. A famous anecdote claims he worried that men might listen to the sacred service in pubs. Despite this, the wedding captured the public's imagination like never before. Every detail told a story. Elizabeth chose Madame Handley Seymour, a dressmaker favored by Queen Mary, to create her gown. The dress was strikingly modern and simple. In an age of flapper fashion, the gown was made of deep ivory chiffon moiré with a fashionable drop waist. It was embroidered with pearls and silver thread, elegant but not over the top. In a patriotic move, Elizabeth asked that the lace for her train come from Nottingham to support Britain's struggling lace industry. Most notably, Elizabeth decided against wearing a grand diamond tiara. Instead, her veil, a piece of Flanders lace loaned by Queen Mary, was held in place by a simple wreath of myrtle, a symbol of love in royal weddings since Queen Victoria mixed with the white roses of York. It was a choice that spoke to her character, elegant, traditional, but refreshingly down to earth. Her bouquet was a delicate mix of white roses and lilies of the valley. The groom, Prince Albert, also made a symbolic choice. He wore the full dress uniform of a Royal Air Force Group captain, honoring his military service and paying tribute to the newest branch of the armed forces. On the morning of the wedding, his father, King George V, gave him the Order of the Thistle, Scotland's highest honor, as a nod to his bride's Scottish roots. The message was clear. This wasn't a dynastic calculation, but a partnership rooted in real affection and a shared commitment to a more modern monarchy. On the morning of April 26, 1923, huge crowds filled the streets of London. As Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon left her family's home for Westminster Abbey, she was about to make a spontaneous decision that would start one of the most touching royal traditions. On her way to the Abbey, she suddenly instructed her driver to stop. She stepped out and, in a moment of unscripted emotion, walked to the tomb of the unknown warrior and laid down her bridal bouquet. It was a deeply personal tribute to her brother Fergus, and an entire generation of men lost in the Great War. No one expected it. With that one simple act, Elizabeth connected the ancient monarchy to the very real grief of its people. It was a moment of profound empathy that touched the nation. From that day, a tradition was born, with most royal brides having their bouquets placed on that same tomb, a custom started not by protocol, but by one bride's heartfelt act of remembrance. Inside the Abbey, 1,800 guests waited. Bertie, flanked by his brothers, stood at the altar, looking nervous but determined in his RAF uniform. Then, as Elizabeth walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her poise was unmistakable. After the vows were exchanged, the new Duke and Duchess of York emerged from Westminster Abbey to the roar of the crowd. They were no longer just Prince Albert and Lady Elizabeth. They were a team. Back at Buckingham Palace, they appeared on the famous balcony, standing beside the stoic King George V and Queen Mary, a picture of hope and continuity. The public, who had followed their unusual courtship, now embraced them completely. The shy prince had won his bride, and, in doing so, had won the hearts of the people. After a honeymoon in Surrey and Scotland, where the new Duchess unfortunately came down with a rather unromantic case of whooping cough, the Duke and Duchess of York settled into a relatively quiet life. For 13 years they raised their two daughters, Elizabeth and Margaret, largely out of the spotlight. Bolstered by his wife's support, Bertie took on his duties with new confidence, while Elizabeth brought a warmth and charm to the monarchy that was all her own. Their comfortable world was shattered in 1936. Bertie's older brother, now King Edward VIII, was determined to marry Wallis Simpson, a twice-divorced American. The government and the Church of England deemed her an unsuitable queen. Faced with a choice between the woman he loved and the throne, Edward chose love. On December 11, 1936, he abdicated, plunging the monarchy into its biggest crisis of the 20th century. Suddenly, the shy, stammering prince who was never meant to be king was thrust onto the throne. The prospect terrified him. He wrote in his diary after telling his mother, "I broke down and sobbed like a child." He took the name George VI in honor of his father to signal stability. But the crown felt impossibly heavy. It was in this crisis that the strength of his marriage became the monarchy's greatest asset. Elizabeth, now his queen, was his rock. She had never wanted this life. In fact, she fought against it, but she met her duty with incredible strength. She gave her husband the support he needed to overcome his insecurities and rise to the challenge. The stable family they had built stood in stark contrast to the scandal of the abdication, and the Yorks became a symbol of duty and resilience. Their greatest test was still to come. During World War II, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth became the heart of Britain's resistance. They refused to leave London during the Blitz, famously saying they wanted to be able to look the East End in the face. Their steadfast courage was an inspiration to the entire nation. The partnership that began with 2 rejections had become the very foundation of the modern monarchy, restoring public faith and guiding it through a period of immense turmoil. The story of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth is so much more than a royal romance. It's a story about personal courage, overcoming self-doubt, and the power of a true partnership. It's the story of a man who never wanted to be king, but who, with the help of the woman he loved, became one of the most respected monarchs in British history. Their wedding in 1923 wasn't just a party, it was the start of an alliance that would, quite literally, save the crown. It proved that the monarchy's strength wasn't just in ancient rituals, but in the humanity of its leaders, their decency, their empathy, and their unwavering commitment to duty. The shy prince and the reluctant aristocrat became the king and queen who anchored a nation when it needed them most, leaving a legacy that still defines the British monarchy today. If you enjoyed this look into royal history, please consider subscribing to our channel for more stories that reveal the true lives behind the crowns, and let us know in the comments what you find most inspiring about this remarkable royal partnership. Thank you for watching.